Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of DoubleDM podcast. I am, as always, your host, Emil. I am here with my co-host, Niels. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine, I guess.
Okay.
Can't complain, but not that much. It's okay. It's okay.
Can't complain, but not that much. It's very close to you complaining, or what do you mean?
No, I can complain, but not that much. It's not that big.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what she said. Okay.
Yeah.
Got that joke out of the way. Welcome to this episode where we will be talking about the art of exposition. How you can convey, especially meaningful world building information, some kind of lore information, some kind of plot relevant information to your players before you actually start playing, or to recap a certain chapter of your story or something along those lines. But first, we are here to recap our weeks, talk about what TTRPG sessions we had, if there was any kind of recent funny event in our weeks that we want to share with our audience. So Niels, why can you complain?
It's university stuff. I learned the last 2 weeks more or less vigorously. And today, just to confirm when and where my exam takes place, I found out I wasn't registered, although I did register. But yeah.
Wow.
It's a shit show.
It's a shit show.
It's a shit show. But yeah, other than that, I'm fine.
Mm-hmm.
I had an amazing TTRPG session where we investigated an old abandoned church where beneath was a cult in hiding, kind of.
Okay.
And trying to summon a sea serpent creature to do whatever the fuck, right? Why ever you want to summon a sea creature with blood magic.
Because who doesn't want to do that, though?
Exactly.
Because, honestly, same. Okay, interesting.
But it turns out the sea creature, because we couldn't stop the ritual, the sea creature actually was a sea drake, so a dragon kind of creature. So the cult kind of failed in what they wanted to do, to summon the big sea serpent to whatever. They summoned a smaller sea drake, which then turned out just to be mind controlled by this cult's ritual. But after we killed the cult leader, the mind control ended, and this sea drake was thankful for our help. So I guess it turned out well. The city isn't in ruins. We are still alive. So I guess everything worked out.
It's always fun when your TTRPG group goes, we're still alive. So the plan worked.
Yeah.
We stopped the worst thing from happening, and that is my death. So the town, that's still destroyed, but I am living.
Yeah, but that's all of my TTRPG sessions this week. Nothing big, nothing else happened. And then just boring learning stuff about chemical analysis and modern techniques in that, and
that you now don't need. Woo!
What I now don't need, or at least for this year. Next time the exam comes up, I'll double check every fucking thing that I do and have screenshots of confirmations and all of the things. So yeah, that's my week. How has your week been?
How has my week been? As I said last time, we had 2 one-shots in D&D 5e. One of them was Adventure in the 9 Hells. My players didn't finish it, and they want to play again at some point. I don't know when, because I don't know. I am not the one scheduling that. I don't care. Then the next day we had an adventure called The Lamenting Lighthouse. It's a very well-rated adventure, and I'm gonna rate it well as well. My God, what a sentence. Yeah, where my players had to go out in a storm to fix or find out what happened to a lighthouse that was invaded by undead creatures.
Okay.
That was only 2 players, because you weren't there.
Yeah.
And they barely managed to win the second boss fight, because there are 2 in this adventure. And it's been fun. It was fun. It was very much fun.
Perfect.
Then on Thursday, I played once again the Dark Eye group, where we are today on the point of recording on the 16th of March, gonna venture into a dense jungle of what is basically fantasy Australia. Everything is poisonous or will kill you. And yeah, the whole environment is hostile as fuck towards you.
Yeah, all right.
Everything is bigger, everything has the mind of a demon or something.
Yeah,
no.
Just big fuck off poison things, including plants, because why the fuck not, right?
Yeah, so that's gonna be fun. And I also played Tyranny of Dragons this Tuesday, where my players finally wrapped up the last things that they had to do for their Varam the White chapter. And they were attacked in their own home base.
Oh boy.
Because in the Tyranny of Dragons book, there's a chapter that says here are 4 attacks the cult is doing on the players. Because the cult has recognized the players are a threat. They are the ones leading the cause against them. And it's best to somehow get them out of the picture or to destroy evidence that they have gathered. And I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, these tables and these descriptions look cool. I'm going to do my own thing because, my story developed completely differently. And now this is this. My players went to sleep in their own home base, in their little home in the upper districts of Waterdeep.
Mm-hmm.
And then they got woken up at night by the sound of their windows getting crashed in and exactly after that, an explosion inside their rooms from fire bombs that set their whole rooms on fire.
Oh, fuck. Okay.
So each player got woken up. They had no gear, no armors, nothing on them, right? Because they went to sleep. I then said, okay, yeah, well, you can grab like one weapon and something from your room before it all starts burning. And then they went outside into their rooms and looked around, right? They saw each other. One of the fun things is 3 of them sleep on the upper floor and 1 of them sleeps on the lower floor, where also their servant sleeps.
Mm-hmm.
And that servant is a normal commoner, 4 HP. She didn't die.
Okay. Respect.
I am not that evil. Because
doubt
because these cultists were smart enough to not throw, they're not necessarily smart enough, but they knew that she wasn't gonna be important, so they didn't throw a firebomb in her room.
Okay, fair, I guess.
And then it was, if the players do not come for her, then she dies. Because then these cultists would have used her either as a hostage or as the first victim or whatever, right? Doesn't matter. But they instantly rushed to her and more or less saved her. So that's that. But these cultists were cultist assassins. They were super specially trained. And all of them had an invisibility potion. So they were invisible before my players could interact with them. And then I had like invisible moving tokens on our virtual tabletop moving around, right? And the players, when they grazed them, make investigation or perception checks to find them. And then at some point they started attacking. These cultists started attacking my players. And it was very fucking close because like 2 players were at like 1-digit HP. One of them went down 2 times. One other was at just 10 or 11 HP. And the fighter that slept downstairs that instantly leaped out of the window out of his room with his stuff didn't take any damage at all because he wasn't part of the fight. Basically, it took way too long to actually get part of the action, which also made it a lot harder for the others to fight because first of all they were split. One of them was upstairs and 2 other players were downstairs. So the one upstairs had to fight 2 cultists at the same time, 2 assassins at the same time, and downstairs they had to fight 3 assassins at the same time. And it was so much carnage and
chaos. I love it. Amazing.
So much distress around everything because this is our home. We're getting attacked inside the place where we're supposed to feel safe. Madness.
Yeah, and just the feeling of, oh shit, the cult knows where we live.
Oh yeah, my players knew that the cult knew.
Okay.
But they did never expect the cult to actually attack because this is Waterdeep. And we have driven out the cult from Waterdeep. We know that because we did that like a week ago. There shouldn't be any cultists in this city anymore. But Waterdeep is a big city. And that was the first
spots.
It was the first of the 4 cultist attacks that are described in the book. Yeah, and there will be other cultist attacks at some points. So yeah.
Okay. And what level are they now?
Currently, they are level 11.
Oh, damn. Okay. That puts the carnage with nearly going down in perspective. Damn. Okay.
They do not have a healer, and I have to remind you, they only have 3 cure wounds on 2nd level through a magic item I gave them because they didn't have a healer.
Okay.
They do not have any way of resurrecting or healing themselves except for normal healing potions, which they don't buy because I don't know why. Because they like to hoard money or something. Some of them are dragons, apparently.
Yeah.
One of them actually is, so.
Okay, that's fun. Can't wait to hear more about these cultist attacks that you plan on throwing at them.
And now my players are gonna venture into the Sea of Moving Eyes to face Arauthathor, the old white death. So yeah, I'm gonna be very excited to play that in a few weeks.
Can't wait to hear about it.
And with that, I have nothing else.
Me neither.
Well done. Let's go ahead and jump in the Art of Exposition, and our episode on how you can create awesome exposition for your creative writing, script writing, or your TTRPG sessions. Hey listener, how are you enjoying the show so far? Tell us about it in whatever way you see fit. Go to our social media pages and add us or DM us about your favorite episode of the show. We would love to hear from you on what impact our show might have had on your home games. Or you could review us on your podcast app of choice and leave us a nice message with a 5-star review. And if you want to go above and beyond, bring a friend into the fold. Tell them about our show and refer us to them so they can get a piece of the pie as well. Thank you for listening to DoubleDM and joining us on this incredible journey.
So, Emil, I have basically with one of my TTRPG sessions, a arc completed now, and want to have basically a bit of a recap and a new start into this whole new arc.
Okay.
And with that, I wanted to make it feel like basically a new start again. I wanted to talk to you a bit about the Art of Exposition, how to start something new with some information that has already happened.
Okay.
And therefore, the first big question is obviously, what is the exposition itself? Well, I wanted to talk to you a bit about that first, so we can get on the same base level.
Okay, so the question is, what is an exposition, right?
Exactly.
Okay, for me, exposition is a device to provide information, to start something. It's a way to give information to someone. In the instance of, for example, a movie, a book, or a game, it's the player, the audience, the reader, because they are obviously disconnected from the game or the in-movie world and beings that you need to explain something to them. And it's a hard thing to do, because if you, watching whatever kind of movie, let's say you're watching a Godzilla movie. You are, as an audience, let's say you have no experience with Godzilla whatsoever. You go into the cinema for the first time ever to watch a movie, and it's Godzilla whatever. And you do not know what Godzilla is. You do not know what this all means, but you want to see this movie. You go into the movie and you sit down. Now the movie has to do some explaining for you, because you don't know what the fuck is going on. In this movie, the characters might already know Godzilla. They might already be doing something, and you need an explanation for why that is. For example, if there is some kind of evil corporation like Monarch in Godzilla, I think that's what they are called, are doing some kind of experiments on something, or are building a death machine, or are doing whatever. Some kind of evil corporation does something. You need an explanation for why that happens, because the characters in the movie would probably know that. They know Monarch is building a death machine or are doing some radiation experiments or something. And they know for what reason. As the unknown audience, you do not know. and you need to have it explained to you, because otherwise you are lacking background information that gives you the chance to understand what is happening, why Godzilla exists, why Godzilla is coming to destroy everything. You don't understand it. You might not necessarily want to as well. Maybe you just want to see Godzilla destroy stuff. That's okay too. Generally, the movie needs to explain to you its own plot in the beginning, or the reasons, the background information for the plot, so you can understand the plot, because otherwise reasons are just not there. I'm just currently thinking of, because I said Godzilla, I'm thinking of big kaijus, and now I'm thinking of Pacific Rim, where they explain to you that at some point these big kaijus just came out of the Pacific Ocean. And then they explain to you that there was this rift that where they come through, and that they come in certain intervals, and now the people are building walls and defense mechanisms against these kaijus, and then there's this Jaeger program, and you get all of this stuff explained to you. That is exposition.
Yeah, so basically a tool to give the audience the essential background information that they need to understand the furthering plot of the story itself.
Yeah, when you're doing a movie, right, you're shining a light on a specific period in that movie's timeline. There's a point where it starts and there's a point where this movie probably ends. And that is the timeline you shine a light on. And everything that comes before that, obviously, as we know, influences what is happening now, right? Your past influences the present, and the present influences the future, because it will be the past when we get to the future. But you do not necessarily know the past. And if you don't know the past, you might not understand the reasons for what is happening in the present, because as we know, the past informs the present.
Oh, yeah. And I think if you know what is happening before and can understand why the things that should happen or will happen in the movie are happening right now, or in the story itself are happening right now, it invests you way more in the story itself, because you can understand the reasoning. It gets relatable. You can...
Yeah, especially if the reasons are relatable, right?
Exactly. With the combination of relatable reasoning and the understanding of the plot itself because of the things that happened before, comes a general relatability with not just the plot itself, but with the characters that act the way they do, because you understand what has happened to the world before and understand how they react in certain ways, even if it wouldn't be the same way you would react as a person, but you can understand and feel why the characters react that way.
Yeah, I agree. But the thing is, now there comes a problem into play. How much do you tell people? How do you display it? But the thing is that there's a lot of information that goes into why something is happening. Things are complex. And you can't just spend 30 minutes or let's say a third of your movie just making sure the reader understands, or the audience or the gamer understands everything to get your plot, because then you're gonna just hit people over the head with exposition. And we all know that that's not cool. You want some information, but you don't necessarily need to understand. For example, if, I don't know, there's this evil company called Monarch. I do not need to know when that company was founded. I don't need to know the date, for example. I don't need to know who the founder was. I don't care. But what example would be interesting is what this company is supposed to do, right? A company is founded with a purpose. Okay, this company is a research company. They do experiments that are very dangerous and very expensive. That is exposition that I might need, because in this movie, they are building a death machine to fight Godzilla, or they are creating Godzilla through accident or even purpose. Now, that is good, because I know, this company is supposed to, and is doing these evil experiments since its beginning. Cost a lot of money, they are dangerous, and Godzilla happened. And the movie now happens because of that reason. I don't care if the company was founded in 1921 or 1922. What might be more interesting to know is the company was founded after the First World War, so the government could do that and that.
Exactly.
That is more interesting than an actual date, because I don't care about the date.
Yeah, exposition is a delicate balancing act to give you the necessary information for you to understand, but not too much to be overwhelmed by it or bored. Because if you just say, for example, with the Monarch, if it was just said that this company was founded, might be too little, because, a company got founded. Cool. Why?
The thing about exposition is that you don't want to make your reader, viewer, gamer sound dumb or feel dumb, because you have to explain everything to them. Yes, everyone knows the company needs to be founded before it exists. Right?
Exactly.
That's something you do not have to tell people. If your company is just this very simple device you want to use, you don't need to explain that it was founded or by whom, because it doesn't matter, and it makes your audience just feel dumb because you need to take them by the hand and explain to them every single detail. No, you don't. You need to just be smart about the presenting your details, and then they will make sense anyway.
Yeah.
So the first question of exposition is, what details do you actually need to present?
For me, I usually try to include something or the things that exist in the world and the reasoning behind them, not just that they exist, because that is basically irrelevant. When they get to that point, they will get to that point anyways. You will see that there is a TV in this world. If it's not relevant to the story, it doesn't belong in the exposition.
Yeah.
But if it's relevant to the story, you should include it into the exposition why this was invented or why this thing came to be. I think reasoning is way more important in the exposition rather than just straight facts, what is there and what isn't.
Yeah, I think we talked about creating a sense of history and something like that, right? The lore behind something.
Yeah.
That should be part of an exposition. It might be very easy to do by putting, as long as, right, you can. For example, if you're in a book, it's harder than to place a visual, but you don't have to explain that a company was founded in 1921 if you just put a founded in 1921 under their logo and show the logo once.
Yeah.
That's way easier than to say this company was founded in 1921. That's kind of more brilliant exposition already. Creating a sense of history in place, right? Since you're informing the present, you want to know the past a bit, but not necessarily the past events that happened, but just give an idea of how history evolved in this realm, in this reality, in this timeline of whatever, right? Because if you're creating a movie that plays on Earth, there are probably some events that shaped it so that the movie exists that haven't happened in real life Earth. Or they have, and you're making a documentary. Then exposition is something entirely different, and we don't need to talk about, because if you're doing a documentary, yes, you need to give more information than when doing any kind of fiction. My expositions, when I do them for my TTRPGs, which we will get to in a minute, how to do that for TTRPGs, we need to still set the baseline for how to do it in general in creative writing. There's also some kind of, you want to show that place where you're at and how that place, how the world evolved to that place. But I also want to connect how the place feels. I want to get the feelings across of this place. That can be done with visuals, with characters talking in any different way. But if you get it across that this place is a place of sorrow, right? It's right after a big war happened. Everyone is fucked. That is an exposition. That gives a tone. That sets an expectation and a tone for the game or for the movie or for whatever. And that is needed. So it's easy to understand why everyone is acting in the way they are, because the history and the vibe of the place inform that everyone is miserable or everyone is happy.
Yeah, and this not only sets the tone for the world itself, but for the coming story that is going forward from that, because this is basically the starting point of the story itself. If it shapes the vibe or the feeling of this world in any way, shape, or form, or just leans into it, isn't really important for the exposition itself.
Yes.
But it sets a tone for the movie or for the book or for whatever medium you want to consume with that.
And I think there's one more thing that I really need in an exposition. Right? We talked about key details about the past and atmospheric vibe. How to set those. That those are important in an exposition. What I also want is for you to explain to me the key events that set the story in motion. You're portraying. For example, as I already said, Pacific Rim, they talked about that the rift opened and that the kaiju started attacking. Those are key events that are needed to actually understand why the characters, or why in the movie there's this Jäger program that is supposed to fight these kaijus. And then the movie sets off with these three big events. Now we're portraying the Jäger program and how they are fighting the kaijus. And the kaijus getting worse and worse and worse. And those three events needed to be shined on because they're not part of the actual story. They are part of the exposition. But without them, we would be like, where are these kaijus coming from? And if you don't want to answer that question, you need to talk about it in the exposition. Because if not, you have to answer that question in your movie. We want to ask, what are these weapons these humans have developed? We've talked about that in the exposition. The people know. They don't need to ask themselves what these weapons actually are. And third, we explain that these kaijus are always getting worse in intervals. So we know why the movie escalates its threat level towards the final battle. And we don't need to ask ourselves, why is it getting worse? Those three questions have been answered before the movie actually begins. And that's good, because that means that the audience of your medium is going to go into your actual plot and story without asking themselves those questions if they have the exposition. They don't need to ask themselves these questions. They know the answers already.
Yeah, just a way of getting everyone consuming on the same information level of the characters in the show, and therefore enabling the consumers to ask themselves the same questions the characters ask themselves in the medium itself. Because you don't have to answer any questions beforehand and get overwhelmed by the many questions that you have. Because you can start on this of the same level and move on with the characters at the same pace, without being or needing to be dragged behind by answering any kind of minor inconvenient question that there is that you need to understand the plot itself.
Yeah, right? If you don't want to answer the questions in your plot, you need to explain them in exposition. Because if you know that these questions are going to come up, you need to answer them. And if you don't want to answer them in the plot, then please answer them at some point. And that's the exposition. That's what the exposition is for then. But I think that there's obviously different types of exposition. And when you look at, let's say, anything but a TTRPG for the time being, most of the time, people don't enjoy when someone explains something very directly to the audience, right? When there's a voice-over narration over like a 10-minute, basically clip montage of something where someone explains to you what actually happens, because it takes out the immersion of watching a movie. It's like someone is really sitting there next to you and like your boyfriend or your girlfriend is sitting next to you and explaining to you what happens in the Lord of the Rings, right? You don't need it. Sure, sometimes it might work and it's good for your movie, especially if you lean into that maybe a bit. A better exposition could be two characters talking to each other. That way you can also set the vibe for these characters' personalities. You can set up these characters. You can introduce the characters already. For example, what I imagine is Jurassic Park. At the beginning of Jurassic Park, there's a lawyer explaining to you what is happening in the park. He is explaining the risks and dangers of this park, and basically he talks about the park. And that way, you get all the exposition you need to know about the park. You know the park is dangerous and it needs to be investigated or something, right? But you learn about the park because the characters are learning about the park more or less. Or someone is learning about the park because someone needs it explained, and that someone is not just the audience but also a character in the movie.
Yeah, you need to find a way to expose the information that you want in a fitting way to the story and to the medium itself. Because in a movie, you can easily get that, like you just said, with the court scene where a lawyer is explaining everything. It feels natural. It doesn't feel just like a narration of some voice off in the distance somewhere, an omnipotent voice just putting the information in your head. Because you have visual that lets you know who is talking and who knows what and who doesn't know. It just gets you immersed in the situation even more and helps you understand what the characters are going through, and therefore again immersing you in the story itself and investing you in the story.
But now we get to TTRPGs and it becomes a little bit more complicated and at the same time more easy, in my opinion, because who is your audience in a TTRPG, Niels?
Basically you, yourself, and your players.
First and foremost, the players. Who are the main characters of the story?
The players themselves.
Player characters. The player characters. So how do you do exposition to explain something to someone that plays someone that should already know the stuff that you're exposing about? Or that you're exposing, because they would know the history of this place. They grew up with it. They know the vibe of this place because they were part of it, right? They were raised in this part of the world or wherever, or in this part of the story. They know what happened before because they were there, but not necessarily the players were.
Yeah, and there you get that more complex and more easy situation right away, because you as a GM, you just can just say out or narrate the information to the players. And in a movie or any other medium, just some omnipotent narrator would be incredibly bad for this situation, for example. But in this case, it can be just described as the memories your player characters have of that place. You have a different way to put that narrator voice in the story or in the exposition. Because it isn't just a omnipotent narrator, but it's someone just recollecting the memories the characters have and put it in front of the players that are supposed to play these characters.
Yeah.
it gets weird a bit because it is a narrator that tells you that, but in this game itself, it isn't.
Yeah.
And therefore, it is easier and more complex at the same time.
Yeah. And I think especially when you're starting a story, not necessarily what you were asking about at the beginning of the episode, but when you're telling a story, when you're starting at level 1 in D&D, when you're starting to create characters, when you're starting to create your world, that's the point where you do the most hidden form of exposition with your players. Because when you're creating a new campaign, when you're creating a new game, you're doing exposition by having the conversation about characters, for example. I want to play a fighter who is a veteran of war. That means there has to have been a war at some point for this. Boom, we got a historic detail. That's part of the exposition. And you see that way your audience, your players, don't actually get exposition blasted at them, but they are creating it.
Exactly.
You're creating everything together, right? This is why you're supposed to create worlds with your players together. And when I'm creating a new campaign and a new world to set that campaign in, I'm gonna sit there from now on, since I did it in Titan's Call, for example, I'm gonna be like, okay, what characters do you want to play? Okay, good, we got your characters. What do you need for those characters to exist in this world? For example, one of our characters, Aiden Fringe, played by Niels himself, wanted to be a towns guard. What needed there to be? What was needed for that to happen? Well, obviously, there needed to be a town, and there needed to be a guard in that town, so there needed to be a hierarchic structure. But also, little small detail and spoiler for Titan's Call, maybe Aiden wasn't always a town guard, right? What was Aiden before he became a towns guard?
Before that, he was a fisher.
So what do we need for Aiden to be a fisher?
There needs to be some sort of access to water.
Exactly.
In some degree.
That is fishable water, right?
Exactly.
A small river wouldn't necessarily give enough fish for the fishing profession to be that present. And that is the way we already did the exposition. We now know the hometown, the beginning, the starting town had to have been at a big body of water where fishing was able. I don't want to say more about the things that we talked about with Aiden, because those might be spoilers for Titan's Call.
Yeah.
But I asked my players, what character do you want to play? What idea do you have for narration for this character? What is your vibe you want to go with? Okay, what do we need for that to happen? What is the history of this place? What is the vibe we need? What is the key events that led for your character to become where they are now when we start the story? I did the exposition for an entire campaign that happens before we start the campaign with my players. Because that way I am not sitting there when we're starting a campaign reading for 30 minutes off of a page and they just have to listen and write down. I'm gonna say this though, I've done that before and it works as well. You can set the stage for your players. But at the same time, you don't want to hit them over the head with anything, because TTRPGs are meant to be played together as a conversation. They are meant to be engaged with. Only hearing you recite a story for them isn't necessarily what they are there for. If all these informations are needed, you have my full blessing to just tell them to the players, right?
Yeah.
Because they need to know.
Yeah, but one thing that helps with TTRPGs and exposition, I think, is that you don't necessarily need to cram every bit of information in the first exposition that you do.
No.
Because you have a longer time investment if you play a longer campaign, for example.
Yeah, that's one of the other advantages of TTRPGs, right?
Exactly.
They are not just a single movie or a single TV series.
You don't have that harsh of a time constraint. Maybe for that one session you have, you can all just play 3.5 hours. But the next session and the next session and how many other sessions there are, you can weave a bit of world information that is necessary to the session that you are going to play right now into the exposition of each session. Or if you start a new quest, the exposition of why this quest is there in the first place. You have different tools in a TTRPG to create this exposition over a longer period of time and at the moments that you need them, really, rather than just in front to get everyone on the same page instantly, because you have time to develop that same page together.
Yeah. One interesting thing a GM did for me once was every time they did their recap for a session, they added some kind of, let's say, 4 lines of history about the place where we currently are. That would be common knowledge. Or he added a little myth or a legend or some kind of other thing, right? Some kind of little tidbit of lore that is not necessarily important to the story right now, but certainly gives us little information, little exposition extra to this place. that was very cool because it was a very natural way to just learn more about this place as a player, because I am obviously disconnected from someone from the character in the game that would maybe know that.
Exactly. And I think especially in TTRPGs with what you just mentioned is that you as a player and as a character, you don't necessarily in an exposition only need the information that is needed for the plot itself, but some bonus information, details that aren't necessarily important to the story, but they immerse you in the place you're playing in. They immerse you in the story. They invest you in the story because you as a player then can better play your character and feel more immersed in it and feel like you are being a part of a living world. That not necessarily every part has to do with the storyline you're currently tracking.
Yeah.
But in general, you are part of that.
100%. Let's come to what you actually asked about. After 25 minutes, 30 minutes of discussing the thing, after 25 minutes of discussing exposition, let's talk about the thing you're actually here for, Niels. You were talking about starting a new chapter. So your players already played the chapter. They have information, and now something new begins. How to do exposition basically in the middle of your story. For example, the second movie now of a trilogy has to do some new exposition as well. How to do it, because the events of the first movie or the first arc of your campaign have happened and inform what is happening now. But there is some new information being thrown into the fold. How to make sure that that information and that new vibe or maybe a new place also still fits or contrasts enough to be felt. That is what we're talking about now.
Yeah, and I think this is a very delicate act of balancing again, because you don't just want to regurgitate information that have already been given out, but you kind of need to some degree to get everyone on the same page again, especially if you have had a longer break between those sessions, that everyone knows what we're talking about, but still in the meantime, something happened with the world that they might have got to through letters or rumors or whatever that they heard in the meantime between, for example, in a long rest, they stayed at a tavern and heard some rumors about the things that happened regarding to the story, but on a bigger scale than they are currently at right now. So, for example, I will in my games probably, or in this game that I was talking about, let them have a week of respite somewhere just to calm down and gather some new information. What information they gathered through whatever means they want to, this will become my exposition, because you don't have to necessarily play out every part of the things that you want to expose.
Yeah.
In TTRPGs, you can just say, okay, there was basically a small time skip, and in the meantime, this happens. Yeah. So now we can
100%
go on.
I love it, because I like when we play out every single day that is important. But when a day is only, we travel from A to B and nothing happens because we're just going along the road, I don't need to spend 20 minutes on that day. But for example, if there's an important character discussion on that day, I want to focus on it.
Exactly.
If there's an encounter, I want to focus on it. But if there's nothing, or there doesn't have to be anything, we can skip it. We can not look at that day. It wasn't needed.
Exactly. And for this example now, they discovered a long-lost ancient dragon city, the last one that hasn't been found. And in the meantime, between those two sessions, or in this week of respite they had, a archaeology team from the university that they ordered to get there, basically, will have found some new information. And these information I will give to my players in the exposition through varying means, either by hearing it from one of the professors of the university, or from a direct sending spell, or a letter that they got, because something in the world is still happening, even if the camera isn't on that part in a TTRPG, because the world is living. And these small little details help everyone get into the thick of it and be in the world together, I think should be, and especially in a middle exposition if you had a longer break between them.
Yeah, I think when you want to do an exposition, right? When you, for example, have done your first arc of your campaign, like you did, gather the important information of that arc and gather the important new information that is needed for this new arc. Decide on the most important factors and then put them into your exposition, and then present it to your players in whatever way, but present the important parts and present all of them, because you as the GM, as we've said already with our riddle episode, for example, you have all the answers. You know what is important and what is not important. And it is more or less your job to make sure your players know what is important and know what is not important. Obviously, you don't have to say to them, this is important and this isn't, because that would take the fun out of it. But you have to somehow present them the important information so they actually have a chance of knowing that information.
Yeah.
If you keep your secrets too close to your chest and don't play your cards openly for your players, they're not going to get that these cards are important because they're never seeing them. If you say, for example, for your game, there's an ancient dragon temple in that city, and they need a special key to unlock the door to it. And you hide that key for them for all eternity, but the important thing they need to know is inside that temple.
Yeah.
That's objectively bad because they're not going to get that information because you hide it from them with purpose. Sure, it is a challenge to overcome, but if you make the challenge impossible, it's not fun. You're not giving your players that information. It cannot be important. It will not be important because your players are not going to work with that information because they do not have it.
Exactly.
And you need to realize that. And your players, they do not have your notes. They have theirs, and they might be very sparse or very thorough. But regardless of how their notes look, they still have to make their own decisions on what they think is important and what is not.
Exactly.
And you know what is important and what is not. So if you shine a light once again on the important parts, your players will realize that these parts are important because they come up more often all of a sudden, right? The name of the innkeeper of that one roadside inn you created is something they might write down. But that information isn't necessarily important. But your players don't necessarily need to know that. Maybe that roadside inn is important because it is in some kind of strange place all of a sudden, right? They don't know. They just realize, okay, there's a roadside inn. It kind of feels weird. I better write this down. It might be important. And then they write it down and realize it might be important. You know, it's not important at all. So you never mention the inn again or the innkeeper again, because then your players will realize in the flood of information you give them, this is just one time, we don't need it. But the dragon artifact that has been mentioned 5 times every single session.
Yeah, that might be of some importance.
These are very simple signals you can send to your players. Obviously, you can make them more complex by having NPCs talk about it, having books write about the artifact, and you don't necessarily have to name the artifact every single time in your recap. That's a very direct way of doing it to make it important for your players, but you don't have to. But the more information you give about something, the more important it will be, because the more information your players know will point towards it.
Exactly.
And that's a very easy way to make something important. The more often it comes up, the more important it will be to your players.
Yeah, and one other thing to keep in mind when you're having or doing the exposition through character dialogue, if you have an inn that is just talking about the things that happened, and the characters themselves have specific, or the NPCs have specific feelings about the things that happened, make sure the information is, or everyone at the table knows that the information that you just conveyed is conveyed through a filter of personal experience, memories, and ideals of that NPC itself, and not just as a straight up fact, because that may differentiate the secureness or the safety of the information and how trustworthy this is.
Yeah.
And that's something that you have to keep in mind as well on if you decide on how to do the exposition or in which with which tools to do the exposition.
But you have a lot of tools at your disposal to talk about the exposition your players already know or should know or have experience, right? Recapping the last arc can happen in a lot of different ways. For example, you could also say, okay, let's play a little bit of a discussion between you and an archmage that you met along the way, your friend, your friendly NPC, a major friendly NPC that you are now explaining everything to. What are you explaining? That way you know what your players remember, what they find important, and how they connect it all. And then they are doing, once again, the exposition for you, because now they are discussing as a group how they see the different things. They might not necessarily come to the right conclusions or remember every single detail, but that also gives you the information of what details you might have to bring up again, of what things you have to explain in a different way to them so they can understand, right? You don't have to do that exposition. Let them do it for you, because they know the information. They know what happened in the last arc. Let them do the explaining. Obviously, if there are gaps that need to be filled, you can fill them in certain ways.
Yeah, but it's the same thing in TTRPGs in general. You have 2 driving forces. And in any medium, the driving forces basically provide the exposition. And in a TTRPG, TTRPG, you have two driving forces. So you as a GM and the players can work together to give out the exposition or to expose the information that you want to expose. It's not all just on the GM. You're there to fill the gaps and expose the new information, but the information that they should already have can come from the players. It's just a good way even for them to recap all the things that they have already experienced, not just by being told that they have experienced those, but by remembering that they have already experienced these things.
Yeah.
And remembering something on your own, I think, at least for me, is something that carves it way deeper into my memory than if someone just tells me.
Yeah. Right. If you're active in the part of remembering, for example, writing it down, right? We all know from learning in school that when you write something down, it stays in your mind longer and more solidly because that's how it works.
Yeah.
Because you are actively thinking about the fact now. You're not just processing it, but you're not just getting it, you're processing the fact now as well.
Exactly.
That is the important part. But okay, so we talked about exposition for the things that have happened in the already story that you played or looked at with your TTRPG, right? The things the players did, the things the players experienced, the things the players did, and the things that the players found out. That's what we talked about right now. But right, if you want to go into a new chapter, there might be new information, new things coming into the fold. That is where your players cannot do the exposition for you.
Exactly.
Here, you have to do it. And there are a lot of different ways. And I would advise thinking of several of them. So not every single information is done through a conversation in a tavern, the players overhear, or the barkeeper telling the players what happened, because that might be a lot of information. And now you have a long discussion your players have to overhear. That's not necessarily how you want it, right? You can do it with a little bit of different bobs and bits. For example, my favorite way of doing exposition for surrounding information that might be important to the current arc my players are doing or are necessarily informing important events happening around the players while they did their thing is newspaper articles.
Yeah.
Handing my players simply written to the point things that they can read quickly to get informed about the ongoing war to the west, or the destruction on the east, or the magic in the south, or something, right?
Yeah.
Simple excerpts, not even a page long, very short excerpts that my players can read and go like, cool, now I know that information. Or now you give your players that information that way. There are discussions by NPCs around the players that the players overhear that they can then understand or interject into and start talking with them. But you have a lot of different ways to give your players that information, and using more than just one of them is going to make it easier for your players to engage with it, because it's not all just one way and hitting them over the head with everything at once.
Yeah, and it feels way more organic in that way, because in real world, you don't get all the information from a single source, usually. Everything that you experience isn't from just a single thing, not from a single conversation, not from a single newspaper article. You have different means of receiving information, either by being in a lecture at university, by overhearing discussion between two people, or reading something in the newspaper, all the things that we just mentioned. And if you include those different means to convey the whole as the information as a whole in different bits and bobs that fit to the tool that you use to convey this information, it just makes it way more organic and way more naturally or natural felt. Yeah. It just works. If you want to say it like that.
Yeah, if you look at other storytelling mediums, for me, right, the exposition is done to get the audience immersed, to get the audience up to speed with everything, to get the audience to understand what you're actually trying to say with your plot. In a TTRPG, as we just talked about it, it's not necessarily that. You don't want your players to get up to speed and understand what is happening. You want to give them a stage to act.
Exactly.
Right? There's a big difference. You want your players to not only just understand so they can experience the plot you want to experience, you want to give them a stage so they can create their own plots. Exactly. Or that they can shape the plot, they can shape something, that they can act, that they can engage. And for that single reason, your exposition cannot be the same as in movies. It needs to be more engaging. It needs to be more simplified. It needs to be more cut down to the important bits, right? In a movie, they can spend 5 minutes explaining everything of the important events. If you spend 5 minutes at a session explaining every single important event that led to what is happening now, your players might not necessarily be interested in all of these events.
Exactly.
You better to do the exposition is by giving them a stage to do the exposition on, right? Throw them into medias res. That's a way of exposition in TTRPGs, because the exposition is there's a war going on right now. Your players are all on the final battlefield of this war. Both armies know that this war is going to end right here, right now. Okay, players, how do you affect the outcome of this battle?
Exactly.
And then that is your exposition. And then the battle ends, and then the story begins you actually want to tell.
Yeah.
For example, everyone dies on the battlefield for some reason, and the players are the only ones resurrected because they have to do something now, by something, by a god or by a demon or whatever reason, right? Any kind of story. But you done your exposition in an engaging way that explained that there was a war, this was the final battle, the players influenced it, and now the plot begins.
Yeah.
It's a stage to act. It's not just information, it's a stage to act.
Exactly. And even in exposition, there is also a certain amount of, or a big amount of player agency that the players need to have, because they are able to interact with everything in the world.
At every point of your exposition, especially when two characters are talking for each other, the players can just say, I interject.
Exactly.
And you have to abide by that because they do in the game. Now, this sounds like you can't do your exposition the way you want to. You can, obviously. You need to have points of interaction for your players.
Yeah, a certain amount of, or a certain information that you that cannot be changed for that matter. Choose the right tool to expose that information.
Yeah.
A discussion might not be the best thing for that then. But a newspaper article might, or a report of some archaeologist or whatever, right? Things that have been basically set in stone. And the players then after that reacting to that and with that. They go to the person that wrote this article and say, well, about that. We have there something, blah, 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 blah. In a discussion, the players can just immediately interact with that. Yeah. And then you have to let that happen because they do, as Emil just said. You just have to choose the right information giving tool for the information that you want to convey. And therefore, because you have the biggest amount of options to choose from in a TTRPG, how to convey the messages, it is kind of easier because you just have that massive amount of choices to choose from, but it is also harder because you have to think about more ways the players can interact with, or if the players can interact with that, and if that is beneficial to the story and to the game itself. Yeah, to have an amazing experience overall, not just for this session, but in general. I think exposition for TTRPGs, to recap a bit for the GMs out there that want to know what to do and how to do it, you need it. You will need it. You will need it. That's okay. Think about how you will need it. Think about what you want to convey with it. Make sure that the players are involved in it, that they are informing the exposition, especially if you're starting the game. If one of your characters wants to play a rogue that comes from a rogue guild, there needs to be a rogue guild, right? Simple. Exposition just opens up new worlds and possibilities for everyone at the table, including you and yourself. Because you have built the world, sure, but the way the characters interact with it open up new possibilities for new story strands for you as well. Yeah. Because every interaction can be turned on its head, basically, to especially that, make a new story. When you make your exposition for your game, make it interactive, make it short and precise. Make sure you give your players the information they need to play to understand what is gonna happen or what will happen or whatever, but also leave them enough room to make sure that they are the influence they want to be, because you want that influence. Exactly. And with that, I think we are done for today. I think we are. And with that, thank you for listening. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to this episode of DoubleDM. It appears you liked this one. What we had to say and our advice helped you. Why not show us how we helped you in a rating, or even write a review detailing us how we helped? You can do this on the platform that you are listening on right now. It's just a few clicks, doesn't take long, and helps us out. It gets us out there and our advice into more ears of more people. Thanks again for listening and joining us on this amazing journey. Have a great day and hear you on the next one. Bye bye.